The one that I think has been getting folks' attention is this idea that the pro-life movement is looking to the pregnancy centers as one of the organizing places and principles for the movement. Well, the other side sometimes recognizes these things faster than we do. And so they have started to attack the pregnancy centers very specifically. And, the other side looks at everything politically, political power, people, money, that sort of thing. All that said, the other side has been using these Deceptive Practices Act.
Hello and welcome to Living Pro-Life. My name is Brian Westbrook, Executive Director of Coalition Life. And our first guest today is Peter Breen, an attorney with Thomas More Society. And we're so glad that he is joining us here today. One of the things that we are going to be talking about is the importance of advocacy work, the importance of pregnancy center work, and of course, what we need to do inside of our laws as well. One of the things he talks about today is the idea of winning even in a so-called blue state. These blue states that maybe we lose in some of the legislative battles, but we can possibly win in the court systems and win by public opinion. More importantly, what are our action items from lessons learned? We've learned a lot of lessons after the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. And so as we continue to look forward, what are those lessons that have been learned? Peter's going to be talking about some of those lessons that we've learned and what exactly can we do as a pro-life movement and as a conservative movement to ultimately see an end to abortion here in our great nation and ultimately see more women helped and more children served and, of course, saved from the atrocity of abortion. This is Living Pro-Life. Welcome. Hello and welcome to Living Pro-Life. My name is Brian Westbrook, the Executive Director of Coalition Life, and I am so excited to have our guest for the podcast here today, the Executive Vice President and Head of Litigation at Thomas More Society, my good friend, Peter Breen. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brian. And for the audience's sake, you and I actually traded outfits. So I took on the more activist, t-shirt. You're wearing my suit. Which is my normal daily apparel, but figured it would be fun. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. It's fun to have a little bit more of a casual conversation here. A lot of times we're talking about some really heavy conversations, very timely conversations. But this time, I think we're going to get to know you just a little bit better. You're doing a lot of media interviews all over the country, talking about a lot of big cases. So we wanted to go back a little bit and talk about, how did the great and amazing Peter Breen get into the pro-life movement? So Peter, how did it all begin?
Boy, it's great. Thank you for the introduction there. I'll tell you, for me, it goes back to college and law school, and for many. So I was raised good Catholic family. We were taken to church, and there was no option to say no. But then I went off to college, and I just kind of was apathetic. I'm less the rebellious type, but just more you're like not great in my faith journey there. Get to law school. I go to Notre Dame. I wasn't going to go to Notre Dame, but then they came through with a scholarship, and like, okay, let's do it. And I found a great group of guys in the Knights of Columbus at Notre Dame. So they had folks that had gone to Notre Dame undergrad. They were in the law school and they'd been in the Knights. And that's a Catholic men's organization. It's got a little more fancy title and there's the outfits and all the other stuff. But at its core, it's a faith-based men's group. Through that group, I really grew in my faith. I got back to church really intensely. And so that really was part of the getting me into the pro-life side. I will say I went to the pro-life march, when I was at Notre Dame. I will admit it was maybe more because I was interested in the fact that there were more ladies than men that would go to the pro-life march.
Normally, yep.
But I mean, by hook or crook, we got there. And then, I eventually got out of law school, practiced law a little bit. And I was so convicted though in my faith, I went to the seminary. So they recruited me for the Diocese of Joliet. Did a year at Mundelein Seminary, which is a wonderful seminary. They sent me to Rome. I did that, did the 8 months in Rome. And about that time I said, I'm not a great seminarian. So I got out, went back to law practice. And, one thing led to another. I met my now wife, who was working for the Archdiocese of Chicago pro-life office, Margie, and she would not date me unless I would go pray with her at the Planned Parenthood at LaSalle Division in Chicago on Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
And, as the young litigator, I mean, look, Saturday is a work day. That's not the weekend. That's a work day. So I would go join her in the morning. We'd, pray with her at the Planned Parenthood, and then I would go back to my office. And eventually I left, the private practice of law and started several pregnancy centers at the request of my seminary professors, who recruited me to do that. And just, I was a patent attorney, so it really was not my calling. But, the money was good and it was a downtown job. But I eventually started pregnancy centers. It was a really incredible ministry I was blessed to be part of this. I will say, Brian, and you've kind of felt this as a guy running pregnancy centers, where I was 28 years old when we started. And like my volunteers, the folks doing the work, are my mother's age.
Yeah, no.
And they're looking at me like, you're this kid that doesn't know anything. I was freshly married and all that, but it was just incredible, wonderful, grace-filled time. And about 3.5 years into that, Planned Parenthood opened their mega clinic in Aurora, Illinois, and it had been done under cloak of secrecy. I don't know if you remember this. It was, in fact, at the time, this is 2007, it was the largest Planned Parenthood in the Western Hemisphere. It's like not just in the U.S., but like the entire Western Hemisphere. And it had been done. They had all these shell companies, and they had falsified the permit applications. I volunteered to help on the legal effort, and I found this provision in the 250-page Aurora zoning code that the Chicago Tribune would later call the silver bullet that we could use to attack the zoning of the clinic. And I volunteered with Tom Brecka. Got to meet him, and we're doing these zoning hearings, which neither of us had ever done. I'm not a zoning lawyer. He isn't a zoning lawyer, but it's litigation though. So
right.
He knew it. I didn't, but we do this and get to the end of the administrative hearing. And of course the city of Aurora wasn't going to go with us. It's in a Democrat town, and they were in on it. And so I said, well, geez, it's taking a lot of time. I got to go back to my pregnancy centers. And Tom said, no, I need you to come to work for me. One thing led to another. We prayed over it, and I joined Tom. And that was back officially February of 2008. So now we're in year 18 of doing this on a mostly full-time basis. I went to the Illinois legislature, which is like a half-time job, and did the political thing in between. But it's really been kind of all the way through. I've just been Thomas More now for a very long period of time. And I got to tell you, I was such an idiot starting up. Like you don't know any
quote. They're going to pull that out of it, right?
Yeah. And I'm carrying Tom Brecka's briefcase to court, and just watching him dress down these judges and get after it and all that. So I was trained by an absolute master and a wonderful trial lawyer through and through, and a scholar and a gentleman. This is a guy that he was in the Army in Vietnam, and he had his law review articles shipped to him. There's no one else in the Transportation Corps in Vietnam sitting there reading the Yale Law Review or the Harvard Law Review just for fun on his off time.
Right.
And then when he does his service and he's finished, they get the GI Bill. He'd already gone to law school. So what does he do? He goes to do the French language immersion program at the Sorbonne on the way back. And you're going, like, who does that? And then comes back home to Chicago, becomes an incredible trial lawyer, eventually then founds the Thomas More Society by necessity to defend Joe Scheidler and against the National Organization for Women and the Southern Poverty Law Center. It was just incredible to be trained by Tom. And then essentially to learn on the job. So representing pregnancy centers, activists, folks across the country in this great pro-life mission.
Recently, I was talking with Tom. He's like, "Hey, we might not have enough attorneys to take on that case or the other one," and he's like, "Let's go. Let's hire more. Let's get more. Let's do more." So one of the things we all love about Tom is that he's like, "Let's go. Let's get this done because we have to defend those on the ground." So I wanted to go back just a little bit to the comment you made about the March for Life and how there's so many females who are going. That's not a bad reason to go to the March for Life or get involved with pro-life work. I would say that a lot of the people I work with are female. So talk about that. Like, a lot of times we're accused that, oh, well, goodness, this is a woman's issue. and it's all about women. But those crazy, terrible men in the pro-life movement, they're trying to squash our abortion rights. But in reality, I don't see that. What do you see?
No, and really, it is the women who are at the lead of many of the top organizations in the country. I mean, we're a minority. I mean, the men are the minority, and each of us, brings a special charism to the movement, and you need the various balance there. So if you have a man as the head, you're going to see a lot of ladies in the upper management of the organization. Or if you have a ladies ahead, she'll have a guy or two in there. It's appropriate on the one hand. On the other, we don't want to play into the other side's framing that, oh, well, this is just a decision, they keeps, abortion's just between a woman and her doctor. Look, this is a decision that impacts both men and women. Obviously, we were all in our mother's womb at some point. It takes two to tango to create a child. I mean, it is good to have a balance there. But when you look at the pro-life movement, organizations that are doing the most and are, that are really pushing hard, I mean, oftentimes there is either a woman at the head of it, or very, if there is a man at the head of it, I mean, we have obviously lots of women who are driving the bus too. So it's, part of the problem, Brian, nowadays it's interesting. I don't even know that you could have asked me that question, or I could have even tried to answer it a few years ago. And now we're just much more free about talking about things like this and other more controversial things. We have to be very careful. But I'm glad we can maybe be a little more free about talking about the differences of the sexes. I mean, this is something, look, the other side wants to say there's no difference between men and women. We actually embrace it, acknowledge it, celebrate it. So
absolutely.
I see right there.
Absolutely. So Peter, talk about the Thomas More Society and kind of things that you're doing, maybe some of the latest and greatest things that are happening. I know you had some issues with 1909 in Illinois. I know you have some issues in Massachusetts. So talk about some of those.
When President Trump came in, that did to some extent change what all of the pro-life public interest firms are doing, because really anything we had pending against federal government, and we had a lot, we had all these criminal cases under the FACE Act, a variety of other things, we're suing them, for religious liberty violations, things like that. A lot of that comes to a halt. Because when the change of administration happens, well, all of a sudden, President Trump pardoned all of our clients on the FACE Act side, which was great. That's like, oh, okay, there we go.
Well done, right?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I was really excited about that. But, at the same time, then you are refocusing where, for us, it was not that big a deal, I guess, in terms of, because our traditional work is at the local level, helping keep activists out of trouble, keeping those sidewalk counselors going out of trouble, keeping the other side off, on their heels so that we can do our work, helping the pregnancy centers. A lot of that is really a state and local issue. So, when Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, decides to come after our folks, I mean, she's coming after them harder when there's a Democrat, or when there's a Democrat, the Democrats are out of power and the Republicans are in power at the federal level. Same thing with Rob Bonta and Gavin Newsom out west. Illinois, same thing. But what we've seen, I would say one of my biggest focuses lately has been this attack on the pregnancy centers. The one that has been getting folks' attention is this idea that the pro-life movement can look to the pregnancy centers, and is looking to the pregnancy centers as one of the organizing places and principles for the movement. I mean, think about it. Historically, we had state right to life that were very active in every state in the country, and county right to life. And, you'd have it down to the political subdivisions, and it was very politically organized. Most of the country, that has really fallen by the wayside. I mean, kudos to the states that have been able to keep up a little more active kind of state and county right to life structure, but that's not necessarily, that's not common. But what is, we've got 3,000 pregnancy centers, and they've got facilities oftentimes, they have resources, they have staff, and they are able to be something of an organizing hub for a local community's pro-life activities.
Yep.
But historically, the pregnancy centers have not been that. And their attitude was, we want to stay separate. We want to keep our head down. We don't want to, attract any attention. There's a change, I think, within the pro-life movement where we're realizing that, oh, you know what? I mean, why wouldn't we organize when you got a facility, they got staff, folks, churches all get together to give to the baby bottles and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there has been I think a real shift. But what happens then? We recognize it. Well, the other side sometimes recognizes these things faster than we do. And so they have started to attack the pregnancy centers very specifically. They realize, hey, that's the place where they're going to organize. They got 3,000 of those. I mean, my goodness. Imagine
Right.
3,000 different places around the country where you can organize people and all that. And, the other side looks at everything politically, and you kind of have to keep that lens on it. We look at it from a different perspective, but they are very political. So they are very about political power, people, money, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So all that said, the other side is been using these Deceptive Practices Act. So about 10 years ago, state of California started forcing the pregnancy centers to put up disclaimers. So like using, putting text in your ads, putting it up in your center, essentially to tell people, don't come here. Supreme Court struck that down, thankfully. But that whole spirit of forcing us to say things that will cause clients not to come and will cause people to flee from the centers, that hasn't changed. So now we've got these Deceptive Practices Acts, false advertising laws. That's the sort of thing. Perfectly valid laws. Look, if you sell me a 16-ounce Coca-Cola and it's only got 15 ounces in it, you're darn right I'm going to sue you. And I should be able to. That's the American way. We do that. As a trial lawyer, I can say that. Or, something worse, like somebody's selling bad cars or they're selling bad medication. It could be very serious and even fatal at times. So these laws are great things. We need these laws. But what they've done now is they are trying to apply them in a way to say that pro-life speech and what we do at our centers is deceptive in some way. And you alluded to the Illinois fight. We had a bill called Senate Bill 1909, started in the Senate, went to the House. But it was in 2023. So we're now 2 years. It was 2 years ago, but it was one of these. It was an early version of a targeted deceptive practices law where it said the Illinois General Assembly in the bill said that pro-life speech is misinformation. It even said not just that they said you're lying about the effects of abortion. Now, of course, when we put at a pregnancy center or a sidewalk counseling, you put out a pamphlet. It's got footnotes up the wazoo. There's almost the entire back panel of a trifold is like, here's all the footnotes. So we're citing studies. You can say, oh, well, your studies are no good. Okay, but that's a debate. That's not a deceptive practice for me to inform the public about studies. But General Assembly in Illinois tried to do this. It was pushed by their very hard left Attorney General, Kwame Raoul. What we did in response to that bill, I think, was an example of what we can do in other places. The pro-life movement identified the bill early. Our folks in Springfield, in the state capitol, they flagged it. The pregnancy centers got up against it. The sidewalk counseling and activist folks got up against it. We got called in early, so we were able to develop the scripts. We had the questions for the legislators to ask. So when you got to that first House hearing, well, the legislators were asking all these questions, but it was something that, we had helped them compose those questions. So they did a great job with it. Look, I can hand you a list of questions and you can deliver it monotone or whatever and not follow up. But these, our legislators, our good pro-life legislators, were just on top of it. They drew out some information. Well, then what did they do when they drew out information? The Attorney General sent some Senate representatives, said, hey, we've had scores of complaints about these deceptive pregnancy centers. Oh, okay.
Great.
Well, so after the hearing, we took all our notes. We filed FOIA requests on the Attorney General's office saying, well, give us all these complaints. And there was a little bit of a delay. There's a natural lag in legislative time, but we jumped right on it and we were very aggressive with it. After about 8 back and forths with the Attorney General's office, we got a few hundred pages of documents. No complaints. Literally none.
What was in the documents? Why would they send you 100 pages of what?
They had police reports from Carbondale, Illinois about Coalition Life, and Coalition Life hadn't actually done anything wrong and no one had been arrested. I mean, literally, this is like the Attorney General's entire record to support this major legislation where they are declaring speech to be disinformation and misinformation. Oh, they had abortion organizations sent in anonymous claims of people from out of state that had informed them, well, I had a problem in Kentucky, so the abortion fund paid for me to come to Illinois to get an abortion. And I'm going like, what? What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Well, but no complaints against any Illinois pregnancy center for an alleged deceptive practice. Not one. I mean, we've got 130-ish, I think, pregnancy centers, or at least, they're over 100. So, but there was a delay. So we had enough time to work through the process with the FOIA request, got all these documents. They had their Easter break, and they come back, and the Senate is going to hear this bill. I'm sorry, the Senate did it first, then it was coming over to the House. And the House side, I had been a House member. So I know some of the folks there. And so there's a level. One thing too that we do have to work on in the movement, there's got to be a level of trust between the legislators, the lawyers, and everybody's got to kind of
Right.
work together. But this was an example where it worked. I was able to bring the stack of documents to the legislators. So I'm not just helping with question ideas or whatever. I'm like, here are the documents, and here are the things, and wouldn't you know it, the deputy AG, who actually I know her. I mean, we were asking about each other's kids and things like that. So I went to this hearing. She gave the same testimony she gave on the Senate side 2 months ago. And I'm like, we have the documents now. And I'll tell you, we only had 3 members of that committee. So it was, there was like 8 Democrats and only 3 Republicans, but they were 3 healthcare professionals. And so they went after the deputy AG. They went after the Planned Parenthood personnel. They went after their colleagues and said, everything in healthcare is documented, and you literally have no documentation of your claims. And so our guys, I mean, just absolutely just eviscerated them during this hearing. And so then it goes to the floor, and our folks did an incredible job. Our pro-life legislators did a wonderful job with the floor debate. And even to the point where Kwame Raoul himself, during the debate, came down and sat next to the chief House sponsor. And this doesn't happen. The Attorney General does not come to the floor of the legislature, but he came down for his bill, his baby, his gift to the abortion industry. And our floor leader was very good because he's a trial lawyer. He's a prosecutor. And he said, I want the record to reflect that Kwame Raoul is literally sitting next to the chief House sponsor as we ask all of these questions. And it even got to the point where the chief House sponsor, she kept answering, well, that would be a facts and circumstances thing. So give him hypotheticals. It's her bill. So he said, well, so if I told somebody that abortion is a sin, would that violate this law? And she said, well, that would be a facts and circumstances assessment. I mean, think about this. Whether sin or not would be the business of the Illinois General Assembly, the state of Illinois, to come down and regulate you. And so we were there on the floor. The Attorney General's there. They said it on the record. Hey, the Attorney General is here. Oftentimes when you're in the legislature, you say a lot of things and you go, is anyone listening? Well, in this case, we were. And I was able to make clear to the legislators, hey, those words that are said on the record, which so often you feel like you're shouting into the wilderness, especially in a blue state, you're fighting and you're always losing. But this one was when I said, no, you're going to lose this in a way that we're going to be able to win it in federal court afterward. Because all of those words, all of that record, then got put in front of a federal judge a few months later. And J.B. Pritzker signed that bill at noon. We filed our lawsuit at 1. Kwame Raoul went and had a press conference at Planned Parenthood at 2 p.m. And because we were really on the ball, because we had done our work well, we had worked together as a movement, when Kwame Raoul got up to do his press conference at the Planned Parenthood, at the headquarters of Planned Parenthood, with a big Planned Parenthood banner behind him, first question's a softball. It's always planted at a press conference. So you took the planted question. Every question after that was about the lawsuit and was about the opposition and about the problems. So then we were able to take control of that narrative and win that case. So we got a preliminary injunction a week later. Here's the funny thing. Even the press conference he did, we used as evidence of viewpoint discrimination. Because chief law enforcement officer of the state is supposed to be a neutral. He's not supposed to be taking sides in a speech issue, but he very clearly did because he wanted the political bump. Well, all of a sudden, now that's all in front of the judge. Even that part, the press conference was in front of the judge. And at the end of the day, we did very well there. We won that case, won it definitively, and really, put the other side on their heels. So it ended that problem for the pregnancy centers in Illinois. But of course, in California, we've got the Attorney General of California suing Heartbeat International. We've got New York, where same thing, Letitia James, the worst Attorney General possibly in the history of the country, suing Heartbeat International under these same laws. We've got a case in Boston, Massachusetts. So that's what we're continuing to try to fight that, using the experience of winning in some of these cases to defend in these other places.
Well, so one of the things we saw after the Dobbs decision, I talked to a gentleman just yesterday, and he says, "What's the Dobbs decision?" I said,
okay,
where have you been? Right? Where have you been? But of course, the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade a few years back. Now the pro-life movement is different. There's a lot of different moving parts and pieces, and now we get to have debates that we didn't otherwise have in the past. at the state level, at the federal level. Of course, we've always had it on the sidewalks or in our pregnancy centers, but these are kind of some new debates that we're having. So tell me about these referendums. How do the states get involved in this abortion battle now?
Sure. And post-Dobbs, we very quickly realized, even though we'd been waiting 50 years for Roe to be reversed, there are a lot of organizations, entities, and the movement itself just wasn't necessarily ready. In fact, the other side was more ready for Dobbs than we were to some extent. And so there's a lot of retooling we had to do. Even we at Thomas More Society got a lot more involved in state legal issues. We realized, hey, I'm a former legislator. I've got a special counsel who's a current legislator. We got a bunch of people that worked for state legislatures. So we're bringing those, skills to bear to assist legislators in dealing with these issues. But one of the points was these referenda. And so we were very involved in where we could bring lawsuits, we did. So in fact, in Missouri, we actually sued against that referendum. We had it knocked off the ballot very briefly. Unfortunately, the Missouri Supreme Court, 4-3, reversed that decision. So we almost had that thing knocked off the ballot and stayed off the ballot. And in Nebraska, we were very strongly in favor of the alternative pro-life initiative that was run. And to me, that model in Nebraska showed us a place where we could win. And that was to provide an alternative to the people of a state. We've had surveys over the years. We've always said, hey, the people of the country are pro-life. They just don't mind exceptions, or they're really, they want some in the middle ground, say. It used to be that you could get 50% of the people in the country to say, I'm okay with prohibiting abortion except in rape, incest, life of the mother. Right. That was literally a 50% plus one position. Unfortunately, the other side has done a really good job of persuading on abortion. There's no point in looking back, but we have to do this job of persuasion. Some folks didn't like the alternative abortion amendment in Nebraska, but the alternative was you would have lost. And Nebraska would be a totally 100% pro-abortion state had you not had an alternative. Florida, my goodness, they only succeeded because they had a 60% vote threshold. And they had every statewide elected Republican coming out against this amendment and attacking hard. I mean, they had to do all this work just to keep the thing about 3 points under where it needed to be to pass.
Yeah, it was 57% in Florida, and they would have lost. They would have lost if it was a 50%.
All the Congress, they went after that. So it took a lot of effort. So we need to realize, hey, if you give the American people a choice, 100% abortion or no abortion, they're going to choose the 100% abortion.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's just the practicality of the thing. The referendum issue. Normally, we in our Republican system, you've got the two houses of the legislature, you got a governor, and so that's how law is supposed to be made. It was actually a progressive idea, as I understand it, to allow direct democracy by the citizenry. Well, at that point, instead of having a couple hundred legislators you need to persuade to get a law passed, you now have a few million people you need to persuade to get a law passed or change a constitution. For whatever reason, we feel okay with a legislature doing a targeted prohibition on abortion or regulation of abortion, but we don't feel okay when it's, again, the direct democracy is not normal in our system. That is, it's an exception, if anything. But when the people are voting on a measure, they're the legislature. It's just a 5 million person legislature, which is a bit of again, it's an anomaly in our system, but it is what it is. I mean, here we are. In fact, we had often, over the years had thought, well, geez, in these states where we can't get control of the legislature, but we think the people of a state are with us, we would maybe use the direct democracy for our own purposes.
Yep.
Well, what happened? The other side did that to us.
Well, again, just your point was it's 100% abortion or absolutely no abortion, right? I mean, it's a binary choice between all abortions at all costs and no abortions, and that's a really, really tough position for a lot of people. Now, for you and me, it's not a big deal, right? We understand where we sit on the issue. But for a lot of people, that's a hard choice for them to make.
It is. And look, if it's a hard choice for them to make, then we have not done our job of persuading those people.
Right.
I mean, that's our job as a pro-life movement. We have to persuade them to embrace the culture of life. It seems to me that the lesson that was taught in these last couple of elections, because now it's been multiple election cycles, you have to offer people something in between. For these states now, where it is 100% abortion, anything you offer them is going to save lives and is going to improve the culture of life in your state.
Right.
And obviously you want, draft it correctly and what have you. But I think the lesson of Nebraska, when we offered an alternative, we won. So we should offer them an alternative. I know Missouri has now, is offering an alternative to its voters. And so we can use these legislatures to do that. In some states, maybe we're just not going to be able to get what we really want. But at the same time, you sit there and go, is the point of this to pull one over on the voters? I mean, we do have a system where there is supposed to be a consent by the governed to the laws being applied to the governed.
Right.
And so if we're going to say, no, we're going to pull a fast one over people, well, that doesn't feel right either. So if you can put forward a provision that will take us from 100% abortion in a state to, say, 50%, ideally on the way to zero, but look, we don't know when we're going to get to zero, and we can chip away. Well, maybe we get from 50 to 25, and then from 25 we work our way down. The ideal being, again, we build such a culture of life. We build such a culture where abortion is unthinkable that we can then go to this place of zero abortions. And one thing, a stat we always used to use when I was running my pregnancy center was that 50% of abortions were repeat abortions. So think about that.
Yeah.
If you stop that cycle for a person, and it's not just that person, it's that person, everyone around that person, everyone who helped with the abortion, everyone impacted by the abortion. If that whole cycle stops, so say like a state like Texas, where there are no abortions, almost the entire southeastern United States now is getting to the place of no abortions. You are going to now have a generation of women and families where abortion just doesn't happen, or at least where it's right. At least illegal. Now they may be going to other states and getting them, but you start reducing that number. The number doesn't go down linearly; it goes down exponentially.
Right.
And so these efforts are really, really beneficial to try to reduce the abortion rate and reduce the number of people who are personally impacted by abortion. Brian, you and I know so many people on the other side are there because they helped in an abortion, they got an abortion, they had some personal connection. If we can have fewer people with those personal connections, the pro-abortion side loses its oomph.
Absolutely.
Instead we've got, if we're having babies, and more babies, more ultrasounds, more good things happening, that is going to help us build that culture of life on a natural basis. We will be rolling downhill instead of trying to roll the boulder up the hill.
Yep.
Makes sense.
I mean, what did the vice president say at the March for Life? He says, "We want more babies." I said, that's not the most eloquent thing I've ever heard, but it's right.
In some of the ways they want to get more babies, we're not super excited about, but
well, that's fair.
We're directionally accurate, and we want strong, healthy families, marriages, and babies coming from that. Ideally, and we don't always live in an ideal world, especially doing sidewalk counseling and pregnancy center work. But that whole spirit, I think, is a wonderful thing, and so that's part of what our work at Thomas More is, to help and encourage doing these things to try to chip away at these 100% abortion referenda and states, and try to build to a place where, again, we're reducing that abortion rate where we can, again, on the way to zero. And maybe, for instance, in Nebraska, there was a big fight. Some folks didn't like the pro-life amendment that was pushed by the pro-life political leadership, the church, various churches, because they said, well, it doesn't ban abortion. Okay. But what it did was allowed the Nebraska legislature to continue to regulate abortion. And again, the alternative was 100% abortion, no power by the legislature to regulate abortion. And there were others that said, well, we want a zero abortion amendment. Well, okay, but you're going to lose. And actually you might draw votes away from the pro-life amendment that just keeps things status quo. But talking these things through to go, look, it's not that we don't want the zero abortions, but we're not there yet. Our people aren't there yet. They're not ready for this. So, and that means we haven't done our job. So, hey, keep persuading and moving your people there. But in the interim, let's move them part of the way if we can, on the way to the rest of it. Because it'll be a lot, it's going from 100 to zero is a much larger distance than going from 50 to zero. It's pragmatic. It's kind of a more practical approach, but it's one that I think it's worked. So.
Absolutely, Peter. Well, we can't thank you enough for, one, being on the show, appreciate that. But of course, more so your work at Thomas More Society, your work with pregnancy centers. Thank you for that. We appreciate that. Anytime we can meet up at the Supreme Court, we'll have a lot of fun doing that. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for everything you guys are doing. You guys are one of the most effective pro-life organizations in the country, and really it's an honor and privilege to be able to work with you.